Okay, you are now live. Sorry about that. Thank you.
Very good. All right, I'd like to call to order the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. And for the record, we have all members present. And I would now ask for a motion to accept the minutes from our last meeting.
Motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
All right. We have a substitute, correct here, Sarah?
Correct.
I'm going to ask if you could read that in for me. I'm just operating off a screen here.
Okay. Substitute offered as an amendment is an ordinance to make the annual appropriation for the current expended expenses, other expenditures, and the capital outlays of the city of Akron for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2021, and declaring an emergency.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Fricker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the amendment that was just read in, or the substitute for the original ordinance that was submitted 2 weeks ago, there was some additional funds that were added for the mayor's office, specifically for the police auditor position. So we added sufficient dollars to fund the police auditor for 40 hours a week instead of the current 30 hours a week. And then we also added funding for an administrative assistant for the police auditor. So that was the change. The total amounted to about $64,000 added to the budget.
Okay, and the administrative assistant, is that full-time?
That is a full-time position, correct?
Very good. Very good. Questions or comments? We'll begin with committee members and Mr. Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Fricker. I think this is a really great step for us to make. I know that this is something that we talked about a lot in our accountability and transparency working group with Councilman Lombardo and Councilwoman Baylor. I also know that the mayor's task force has also been working on this, and I believe the criminal justice subcommittee that they're going to address us in a little bit here at 3:30. So, and I know that part of that is the discussion of whether there should also be a deputy auditor. I think, that makes sense in terms of, the scope of the Akron Police Department in terms of, succession planning and things like that. But, I don't think that has to happen right now. But I do think that in light of the fact that the group is going to speak to us at 3:30 about their recommendations, that I hope that we can take a week's time and just continue to just discuss this a little bit more before passing. But I do think this is a great step forward. He's been without that sufficient staffing for a long time, I think really since the Great Recession, for some of those buyouts and things like that. So I think this is a wonderful step forward for the city.
Thank you, Mr. Malik. Ms. Samples.
Thank you, Chairman Freeman. I just want to thank the mayor and Steve, who is phenomenal with controlling our dollars the right way, with finding the resources for us to help feel young over in that department. I think it's much needed. It's something we've talked about for years, not just with the committees, but it's something that we have talked about since I've been on council, him having those resources and that assistance in order for him to do an efficient job, but to have that support system to help him do that job even more efficiently is much needed. So thank you for finding those dollars for him.
Okay, any other comments? I do not see any hands.
Yeah.
Yes,
Mr.
Oh, okay, Mr. Mobian.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I couldn't get to the raise hand feature fast.
That's fine.
This has been much needed for some time, and if we're going to have an auditor, we should make it so that the person can do his job and do it as effectively as possible. So these additional resources will certainly help. So thanks a lot.
Thank you. And I would just add to, just for the record, and I don't think Mr. Young's with us. none of this is speaking in any disparaging terms whatsoever about what Mr. Young has done. It's been quite a task for, been basically just him. So I think the time is right. And again, thank you, Mr. Fricker, for hearing us, and thanks to the administration for hearing us. And we look forward to, Mr. Young's work being even more profitable than it has in the past. But just wanted to say that. All right, Ms. Somerville, I see you're here.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I just want to take an opportunity just to publicly thank the mayor. When I went to the mayor and asking him to look at really being intentional about getting Phil what he needed, 40 hours and a full paid time administrative assistant, he was willing to do that. And so I just wanted to thank him. I know in Ward 3, I rely on Phil a lot. And so this is going to be able to help him do his job and to be able to address our constituents' complaints and situations. And so I just want to thank the mayor publicly for finding the funds to do so.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Baylor.
Yes, I also would like to thank the mayor and President Somerville for orchestrating the different committees that have worked on these initiatives. And it shows that once you get people coming together and with the community, that things happen. So this is just encouraging to know that this came out of some of those discussions that we were having. And thank you to also Councilman Mallett for the role you played. You played a big role in all of this. So I want to thank you as well.
Very good. Thank you. All right. I do not see any other hands raised. Are there any comments anywhere? Okay. We are having a meeting at 3:30 today. So Mr. Mallett.
Sorry, Mr. Freeman. I did have one question for Mr. Fricker. I know that, throughout the budget process, we discussed, obviously, the current budget was not put together with the thought of, the aid that's going to be provided through the American Rescue Plan Act that was signed, I think, Thursday or Friday. But, I do think, kind of just reading some of that commentary over the weekend, I'm mindful, hopefully, that council will, participate in those discussions going forward. I'm sure there'll be an amendment at some point later on in the year. But do we have a sense, even initially, of what that number might be, of what we might receive?
I don't think we know exactly what that number is going to be. I can tell you that we are putting in place a framework to where, we can evaluate the various potential uses for any money that we might get, and so that we can kind of come up with a methodology for the various projects and expenses that might be funded with that money. But I don't know that we have a sense yet of exactly how much money we would be getting.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for the framework. I think it it shows in the stewardship of our budget and the reserves.
Yeah, let me add just one thing about that. The first allocation probably isn't for at least 60 days, and then the second allocation for another year. So there's certainly some flexibility. It's different than CARES Act funds. There is some flexibility, but there are buckets that it needs to fall into. And so we'll certainly, put together that framework to be able to do those allocations, to make those probably investments into public infrastructure, lost revenue, neighborhood improvements. And those are just spitballing, but we'll come up with a framework in those buckets for you to be able to take a look at. Not tomorrow, not next week, but there's still some guidance coming from Treasury and legislative intent about the implementation about all those funds too. So it changes just a little bit.
Thank you, Mayor.
It's my understanding we're just not looking at 21, 22, 20. We could be looking several years out as far as the monies that were just passed.
You have to have allocation within 24 months. You got to do 24 months to have that allocation into the pipeline, and then kind of go from there. But yes, this hopefully, if we do something more permanent and then we do something that lasts for 5 years, obviously that's part of that metric and that scorecard of, is it a one-time expense that it costs us X? or does it get us 9 or 10 years into improvements into a public infrastructure, into neighborhood improvements? What are those things? And we'll have a framework of where those be taken into account for sure.
Very good. So do we want to make it a rule that anybody that's working for the finance department can't retire until all these? Mr. Neal.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's going to be critical that we as a council, along with the administration and the finance department, put together a process that allows our citizens to participate. The indicator of it was asked how much money is going to be coming our way, could be up to $173 million coming to Akron. Our neighbor up north is getting $500 million. Columbus is getting $188 million. Toledo is getting about another 180 something. Youngstown is getting 88 million. Cincinnati is getting over $250 million. But to Akron right now is targeted $173 million. This is not within our regular budget. This is over and above. So it's going to be critical that we have a plan that includes, and the reason why this money is coming to us, a large portion of this money, 1, because of our population, 2, because of our poverty indicators, and 3, because of the unstable housing that is in our community. So really a lot of this money is coming to us because of the least of these in our community, those who have been most adversely impacted by COVID. So it's going to be critical that we have a process in place that allows them to contribute, because these are their dollars, to help guide us in how to allocate these funds. As the mayor stated, there are certain restrictions, but these funds are more flexible than the dollars that came before us before. And so it's going to be critical. But I want to speak to our regular budget dollars. Our budget doesn't have to be passed, Mr. Chairman, until the end of the month, the 31st. Is that correct?
It has to be passed before the beginning of April.
Okay. I would like for us as council to take some time to really look at where we could find some dollars to address this gun violence that's taking place in our community. Policing is one thing, but if we heard the community during the George Floyd demonstrations, it's the proactive community engagement that needs to be done so we don't even have to get to the police. I mean, we're averaging more than a killing a week. Last year, we had more than 50-something killings, and we have not met once as a council to talk about how we can utilize these funds to address this need. I think it's critical. Now that, you know, when a city establishes its budget, it's like establishing a value statement. And we have to show that we are concerned about what's taking place. It's not about just putting more police out on the street. Because by the time the police are called, the problem has already happened. We've heard from our constituents. They want us to be proactive. I think it's now, before we pass this budget, we need to look at how can we better govern holistically. If any of you have been following, just last week there were 4 killings? There were 2 in my ward, 2 in Ward 3. We haven't had a conversation. We cannot pass this budget without having a serious conversation about how we're going to address this gun violence, how we're going to work with the community to put some resources in place to address this gun violence. And so, you know, in light of, I don't know, I'm going to, in talking to colleagues in other communities, because most metropolitan areas had a spike in gun violence during this COVID crisis, I don't know if any of those dollars could be used in that manner, but I think we have to do our due diligence, as already been stated, to find out which ways we could be creative in using those dollars. Because we passed a resolution saying that racism was a public health crisis. Gun violence is a public health crisis. So we have to be intentional about addressing this. All last year, we did not meet once to have a discussion about how we can be proactive in addressing this. But before we pass this budget, today's the 15th, that would give us to the 29th. We could pass it on the 29th if we take time on the 22nd to really have an in-depth discussion about what we can do to address this. And I know, because if we don't do it now, we had conversations about doing things last year. We just don't get to it. We have to, take a different approach. And the approach I believe we need to take is now that we're having these discussions about the budget, we have to have this discussion about how we can allocate dollars, to address this matter. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I weigh in 1 second?
Yes, please.
Of all the things that we probably disagree on, Russ, I think we agree on this. And we've asked ourselves not only rhetorically, what does reduction of gun violence interruption look like? And I ask that more rhetorically than saying, okay, give me an answer, because you're right, it's not a policing problem. And once a gun has been fired, the problem is over. Now it's just another statistic. And it's not to blame everything on COVID, but I think it exacerbated some pressures on the community to do that. And I've talked with colleagues like you have not only across the strait, but across the country. And what do your interruption efforts look like? Is it really, what is it? I think it's multifaceted than just saying one thing. It is about a lot of the education and economic opportunities. I certainly, in looking at those CARES Act dollars, there's certainly a lot more legislative and agency restrictions than we would have liked. With the next round that you talked about, there are a lot less restrictions to be able to do some things like that, and those have been part of the initial framework conversations about doing something really. And I don't know what that looks like. All the answers don't rest in here, just like they don't rest, upstairs or in any other office. But our commitment is to do something significant about gun violence. Not only take them off the street. It's a broader issue of the availability of and what they mean out there and how that looks like. And I'll just say it like this: if it's not part of this conversation of when you pass the budget, because I believe it's a value statement too, it's definitely a conversation with that funding that comes, and that's the initial discussion. And I look forward to the input on some of those things. I don't want to hang up one for the other, but I agree that the budget is a value statement. I just think there's some things that we can address in a better way once we're in that position to do it. And I say that by saying I don't have the answers, but we're making a commitment to do that and how that looks like too. I don't want you to hang up one for the other. That's the only plea that I have. I don't want to not pass this because we haven't done this. I've made a commitment that we are going to do something. I don't know what that is, just because I just don't have the answers on that. I wanted to make sure that you guys knew that and that it was fair to be able to say that, but thanks.
Thank you. I will say this, and I'm hesitant to go to the last week on passing this budget. So if we're going to have a meeting here at 3:30 today. If we do not pass it this evening, I think it would be just expeditious for us not to wait till the last week, barring whatever could happen. So, any other questions or comments? All right. Okay, we will move on. We'll continue to take time, and we will move on. We have one resolution under new legislation, and this is a resolution approving and confirming the appointment of Joseph Farisi, Alicia Marchand, and Megan DeLong, the alternate, to the Akron Local Board of Tax Review and declaring an emergency.
Hello. Hi. I'll be speaking on this today. Members of council and committee, Shelley Goodrich. Just wanted to discuss this piece a little bit. We obviously have to put together an income tax board of review. The last board of review, the members expired at the end of December in 2020. So wanted to look at this and reevaluate who was on this board. So we have some new board members that will be joining. Megan DeLon, who is a valued member of the community and just went through the Mayor's Citizen Institute, also works for the Girl Scouts of Northeast Ohio, and is very committed to this community. Joe Faris, who is an attorney with a specialization in taxation and bankruptcy. And I think he'll be a great addition to this board with that background. And then we have Alicia Marchand, who resides in Highland Square, and she's also been quite involved in the community, as well as she's getting her master's of public administration right now from Kent State University. The mayor also has one appointment to this board as well, and we're still kind of finalizing that, but wanted to get the board seated because we do anticipate having some tax appeals, during this calendar year. So if you guys have any questions or want to ask the new board members or proposed board members any questions, I would encourage that. Thank you.
Very good. Questions, comments? Mr. Malik?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to thank all three of you for being willing to serve in this role. I know that, this is in many ways a continuation of community service that you all are involved in. So I really appreciate it.
And if Joe, Alicia, Megan, any of you would like to offer a comment, we'd certainly welcome that. Your faces alone are enough. Thank you. So, all right, looking to see if there's any other comments or questions. Ms. Samples.
Thank you, Chairman Freeman. I just wanted to thank Megan for her willingness to continue to serve the Akron community. And I am so proud to have you as a resident in Ward 5. I was so happy when I saw your resume. Shelley, you're getting a good one here.
Yes, we're excited.
Yeah, so welcome aboard, Megan.
Okay, welcome to each and every one of you. I see no further comments. So do I have a motion for suspension of the rules?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second for suspension of the rules on the appointment of Joseph, Alicia, and Megan to the Akron Local Board of Tax Review. All in favor, please let it be known by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Oh, look at that. It was unanimous. Thanks to each and every one of you for your participation. And thank you for just your interest and your good work in our community. With that, we have nothing else to come before us. And so we will adjourn at 3:26. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our last committee meeting of the day will begin at 3:30, and that's the Special Committee Reimagining Public Safety. Again, we'll begin at 3:30.
I'm going to leave the live stream on. I'm going to make sure everyone is muted.
And Sarah, we're going to be ready to go right at 3:30.
Okay. Ready when you are.
Okay, we're ready.
Okay, go for it. You guys are still live.
We're going to call the Special Committee for Reimagining Public Safety to order. Going to ask if the clerk will read the roll.
Baylor.
Aye.
Connor. Freeman.
Aye.
Fusco.
Aye.
Hamer. Lombardo.
Aye.
McKittrick.
Aye.
Malik.
Aye.
Neal. Mobian.
Aye.
Samples.
Aye.
Somerville.
Aye.
Swirsky. Okay, I do see that Councilwoman Connor and Councilman Neal have joined us. So all members are present except for Swirsky.
Okay, thank you so much. So for interest of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. I have asked Mr. Bill Rich to join us this afternoon. Mr. Rich is actually the chair of the Criminal Justice Subcommittee. Again, Mayor Horrigan organized a task force and broke the task force up into different focus areas. And Bill Rich actually chairs the Criminal Justice Subcommittee. And all subcommittees were charged with really looking at their subject area and bringing forth recommendations. The Criminal Justice Subcommittee has really hit the ground running. In fact, I think they are the only committee that actually has recommendations at this point in time. And I know they are going to continue to work, but I've asked Mr. Rich just to come and to share so far the recommendations that the committee has come forth. I think it's important that council hears exactly what our community leaders and our citizens feel is important and feels is needed. And I think it's perfect because their recommendations and their thoughts and their conversations line up exactly with what council has been talking about, lines up really in terms of what council's recommendations were, particularly around Phil Young, our police auditor, with the accountability committee. So at this time, I'm just going to turn it over to Mr. Rich, who will just share with us a little bit about the criminal justice recommendations and some of the conversations that have been had in the subcommittee, please.
Okay. As Council President Somerville just indicated, the Criminal Justice Subcommittee of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force recently submitted 2 recommendations to the mayor and to the council through the president. They're interim recommendations. These are the first recommendations we've made, and I believe the first recommendations that any of the subcommittees have made. We have much more work to do, but these recommendations concern the functioning of the police auditor's office, and it was the sense of the subcommittee that there were some steps that needed to be taken right away, especially with the budget coming up, that were really not much in need of debate, at least as far as the subcommittee was concerned. The 2 recommendations have to do with the resources of the Office of Police Auditor, and the police auditor's access to information. Those are related because, of course, the more information the police auditor has access to, the more work there is for the police auditor to do. So let me just talk a little bit about the resource question first, which I think is probably our main focus today. The police auditor's office was conceived of and originally implemented as a full-time position with an administrative assistant. Sometime later, years later, the auditor was cut back from a full-time position to a half-time position. And the administrative assistant position was eliminated for a time. I understand there was an intern assigned to the police auditor, but that was only for a relatively brief period of time. With at the time, 20 hours, 20-hour a week position, it really wasn't possible for the police auditor to do what the police auditor was charged with responsibility for doing. At more or less the same time, somewhere along the way, the police auditor's access to information was also restricted beyond what it had been previously. And so in the subcommittee's view, the police auditor has been hamstrung and has not been in a position to perform the job that he was originally asked to perform. And in the subcommittee's view, this requires action, and the sooner the better. It's a matter of urgency in the subcommittee's view. The subcommittee recommended that the police auditor be returned to a full-time position, that the auditor have a full-time administrative assistant, and it also recommended that there be a full-time deputy police auditor position created and filled. There was some debate within the committee about that last recommendation, but ultimately a large majority supported that recommendation. These recommendations were submitted to, as I indicated, to the mayor and Council President Somerville. The word that we got back was that the mayor was in support of making the auditor full-time and assigning a full-time administrative assistant to that office, but wished to see data supporting the need for a deputy auditor. And so that's where we stand right now. Personally, I think it's a reasonable request that it be documented that there's a need for yet another full-time position. And it may be that it's not possible to document that one way or another until the auditor is full-time, has a full-time administrative assistant, and has access to the information that he needs access to in order to do his job. So it may take a little experience in the future to actually determine whether a deputy auditor position is needed. I can talk about the access to information piece of this if there's interest in hearing about that at this point. This is going to require, I think, probably legislation on the part of council, and the law department will, of course, be involved in drafting that legislation.
Mr. Rich, you can.
Okay. So what the committee has recommended is that, first of all, that the police auditor should, within 72 hours of making a request, have access to all materials, documents, photographs, audio recordings, electronic files, any other tangible evidence in the possession of APD or any other city office relating to either a duty-related incident involving APD personnel in which someone died or suffered serious bodily injury, an allegation of improper use of force by APD personnel, or any allegation of bias, discourtesy, retaliation, or other misconduct by APD personnel. That's the first item. The second item is that if the police auditor requests body-worn camera footage relating to any of those three items I just mentioned, that the city should complete its review of that footage and redact whatever information that federal or state law prohibits the police auditor from receiving. And I'm not sure, there's a question there about whether those prohibitions actually apply to the police auditor. But if so, redact the information and provide it to the police auditor within 72 hours of the request. This is so that the police auditor is able to act quickly and before evidence and memories start to dissipate. Third, the police auditor should have convenient access to any professional standard software applications that are used by APD, either in his office or if that can't be arranged at a workstation at the headquarters of APD that the police auditor can visit and use. And then finally, within 72 hours of any of the following occurrences, the police chief or the chief's designee should inform the police auditor of the commencement of an internal investigation of an APD employee, the receipt of a civilian complaint, an incident involving a reportable use of force as defined by APD policies and procedures, an incident involving an in-custody death or serious injury, or becoming aware of the filing of a lawsuit against the APD or an APD employee acting in their official capacity. Those are the recommendations of the Criminal Justice Subcommittee on the issue of access to information.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rich. I just want to say, you guys have done an absolute phenomenal job looking at these issues. And so I want to just kind of open up the floor. I don't know if there's any council members that have any questions for Mr. Rich at this time. I do see Councilman Malik's hand.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you very much, Professor Rich. I know the group has had a number of discussions, and I appreciate the speed with which you all have brought these issues up. I know that obviously those recommendations mirror what recommendations we had in our Reimagining Public Safety report. And so I hope that, obviously we've been able to work on the staffing issue from the side of the budget. I hope that in short order, we will be able to bring forward legislation that codifies those issues. I'm not positive whether those recommendations went to all council members. So if not, can we make sure that Ms. Viviano is able to share that so everyone can take a look at that exact language and start to weigh in. But the point that I guess I wanted to make is kind of in line with what you were saying, Professor, which is that I think that, clearly Mr. Young has been hamstrung for many years, right? And I think the staffing is really going to help. I think that the access is a really key piece. And I think if you can talk a little bit, the group is going to continue to deliberate about kind of a third piece, which is kind of independence from politics, which means, a civilian review board or what have you. And obviously that's kind of a broader question that might involve charter amendments and things like that. But I think that we should see these three principles as three sides of the stool, right? Access, staffing, and independence, right? And I think all three of those things are necessary for civilian oversight. So, I hope we continue to have the discussion about the deputy auditor, because I think, if we pass an access ordinance like that, there's going to be, work that, 4 or 5 or 10 people could do. I'm not saying that's what's needed, but I think, having one deputy auditor is reasonable. And especially when you look at other jurisdictions across the country, there are offices that have 4 or 5, 10, 12, 20 people. I think having 3 people, especially in light of the fact that Mr. Young is not going to be there forever. And when we have offices like labor relations or other offices, we have a deputy who is learning how to do that job and is learning that institutional memory and then is able to take over. And we don't have that process in place right now for Mr. Young. So I think that's a really key piece, but I think the access piece is key as well. But can you speak a little bit, Professor, about the broader things that you guys are going to look at next?
Yeah, sure. But first, let me say that I just want to echo your sentiment about the idea of having a deputy in place before, whenever it is the Phil Young retires from that position, rather than have somebody, just walking in cold with, the police, with Phil Young gone from the office. I think that's a crucial point. But yes, the Criminal Justice Subcommittee is already looking at and will be delving further into the idea of making the police auditor independent, politically independent in some fashion. I don't think the committee at this point has a settled view about exactly how or even perhaps whether, although I think there's a pretty strong sentiment in favor of political independence. And there are various ways in which that could be done. The Civilian or Citizen Review Board is one of them. That in itself wouldn't make the police auditor independent, but if the police auditor is accountable to and removable by the Citizen Review Board, then that would make the police auditor independent of executive control. Other traditional possibilities would include making the police auditor removable by the mayor, but only for cause. Currently, the police auditor serves at the pleasure of the mayor. I think the immediate issues, though, have had much more to do with the lack of resources and the lack of access to information than with the with the lack of independence on the part of the police auditor. As I say, the subcommittee will be delving into those issues, and I expect we'll be making recommendations on those larger questions, but saw the need for prompt action with regard to resources and access to information.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rich. I do see Councilman Neal's hand. Councilman Neal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate what was shared. A couple of things I want to highlight is, one, if we can, we know that this is going to impact the budget. If we can have a true understanding of how this impacts the budget, where the dollars are coming from, since they weren't, in the general allocation. And this is in context of our overall conversation about the budget. When we used to get the budget, for those who've been around for a little bit, you remember the different departments would have written in the budget different positions, even if no one filled them, so that we at least had an allocation. So from the budget standpoint, if we could have that. Then for us as council, we went to the Reimagining Public Safety because we realized that there were some systemic things within the policing. But it's been highlighted by this discussion about the police auditor. We need to take a look at, why did it take us so long? There are some systemic things within how we govern, and I don't want to let that go by. Why did it take us so long to get to this point when we've been talking about the auditor needing support for years? So I'm glad that we finally addressed this issue, that I should say that we are finally addressing it, but there is something deeper, more systemic within our process that makes us move at a snail's pace. We see it with the tow truck legislation that has taken us 4, going on 5 years to address an issue, and we see it in other things. There is something systemic within our process that has to be addressed. So as we look at this, all these different policing issues, there's something even deeper that we have to address, which is how we come to about making situations. Because who knows, if it wasn't for the death of George Floyd that made our community rise up, we'd still be kicking the can down the road about Phil Young and what he needed. So I just want to ask us to be real intentional about looking at how we come decisions within our process. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Neal. Are there any other comments, questions from any other council members at this time? Councilman Malik, I see your hand.
Thank you, Madam President. Just wanted to make two short comments. I think one of the things that in the discussions that we had in Reimagining Public Safety, we were able to have some folks come in from the National Association of Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement and come in and really talk about different models and different practices across the country. And obviously this is a current topic of much interest, but Phil Young has participated in these NACOL, the acronym NACOL, discussions for many years. And one thing that was really helpful is that they said that there aren't any necessarily best practices, right? You have to do what's right for your city. You have to really build upon the practices in your city and kind of slowly turn it into what makes the most sense. But they did have a list of effective principles, and those include the access and independence and staffing. So hopefully, perhaps when we bring in some of that legislation, we can have folks from NACOL come in and do one of those presentations for us. And then the other point is I just want to underline that this is not about going after the police department or anything like that, because when you have a true system of civilian oversight, it really can be a two-way street. And it can really help address those obstacles, trust gaps that exist between the community and particularly communities of color in law enforcement. But it can also help tell the story of the police department to the community, because Councilman Lombardo and Councilwoman Baylor know when we were having those discussions with the police department, they start bringing up programs and software and things like that the average citizen doesn't know about, even I didn't know about, but are really great tools of accountability that exist. They have a program that they started last year that runs all of the grades that field training officers give recruits, and checks for racial bias and gender bias and controls for all of that. And the average person doesn't know about that. So I think a key part of having that staffing in that office, a lot of these offices around the country, they go out and they do that storytelling, and they really tell the community, hey, this is what this department does well, right? And they get suggestions for what it can do better. So those are just two final points, and I've talked long enough.
Thank you so much, Councilman Malik, for adding that. Councilwoman Connor.
I also want to reiterate Councilman Malik's point. This is a great opportunity to educate our citizenry about the good things that are being done. And I would also like to backtrack to the topic of a deputy, not just to wait till Mr. Young may or may not retire. There's always illness, all of those kind of things. I mean, in this era of COVID, we've seen how illness puts people out of commission right away for 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So I would say the need for a deputy is fairly immediate and would be a great asset and helping to Mr. Young.
Thank you. Councilman Neal.
Yes, Madam Chair. I did have one question, and this is just for us to go back and review. I know we passed the body cam legislation, and when I heard Mr. Rich making the comments about the auditor and 72 hours and everything, just want us to go back and look and make sure that there isn't a conflict between what we passed in our legislation and what we're saying with the auditor. So I think it'd be good for us to take a look at that, because we don't want to compromise his job by saying one thing in that video cam legislation and then him being mandated in another manner.
Okay, thank you so much, Councilman Neal, and we will definitely take a look at that. Are there any other comments or questions from any other council members at this time? Okay, so
may I just
absolutely, Mr. Rich.
I wasn't aware that the city council had passed the legislation on body cameras. I wonder whether Councilman Neal was thinking of the charter amendment, in which case having chaired that charter review commission and having been intimately involved in that, I can say that there's no inconsistency between what the subcommittee is recommending and what the charter amendment that passed prescribes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rich. So if there are no other comments or questions for Mr. Rich, again, we just want to thank you for all of your hard work and continue the conversations. Again, it did take us a while to get here, but we're here. We're having these conversations. A lot of these conversations are difficult, but they're necessary. And what I like most about it is we're moving past talking and we're actually making things happen. And the city of Akron is leading. And so we should all be really proud of that. So again, Mr. Rich, thank you so much for all of your work. And please let your subcommittee members know that we appreciate their hard work on these issues as well.
I will do that. We're meeting this evening.
All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So council members, before we adjourn, we also have Dr. Bierman, who is online with us as well. And so we are really excited because, you know, council has been meeting and making our recommendations, and we're getting ready to move into this next step of reimagining public safety. And that is our community engagement component. And so we are ready to go. We're excited about our partnership with the University of Akron. They have done an absolute fabulous job putting together a flyer that we hope, Sarah, if you can help us make sure that all council members get the flyer electronically. We're asking you to put that out on your social media, putting it out in your email blast to your constituents. We want to get as many Akron residents signed up to participate in our focus groups as possible. Again, the University of Akron professors and students will be helping us engage these conversations with the community. Again, that's what's most important. We want to hear from residents. We want to make sure that we're talking about the right issues. We want to hear exactly what their perspectives are, what their experiences have been with police, and some of their concerns about, you know, safety in their own particular neighborhoods. And so I just wanted to give an opportunity for Dr. Bierman just to come on and kind of share with us in terms of, you know, where we are and as we start this process and what this will look like. Dr. Bierman,
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, President Somerville. And it's really great to see you guys. There's a number of you who I've had a chance to work with in the past, and it's really nice to see your faces. My name is Carolyn Behrman, if you don't know me, and I'm a faculty member in anthropology, working with Dr. Rebecca Erickson. Becky Erickson has actually been engaged with, as you know, council since last fall, working on this plan, and she, graduate students and undergrads are now organized and trained for this next step, and we're really excited about this collaboration as well. As somebody who thinks that the university and the community need to always have a great collaborative relationship, this makes me particularly happy. So the plan, which has been approved by the Institutional Review Board for Research with Human Subjects at the University of Akron, is to conduct a series of small groups, small group Zoom meetings, so 6 to 8 people in a focus group. I don't know, have you guys, have you seen the questions for the focus group?
If you actually have them, Dr. Bierman, that would be great if you can pull them up.
Yeah, do you want me to share screen, or would you like me to send them to you?
You can share screen if you like.
All right. I'll do that in just a second. Let me quickly make Becky's other points before I forget to do that, and then I'll share the questions. So Dr. Erickson couldn't be here because she's actually teaching across this time, so her apologies, and I hope I represent her properly. She just wanted to make sure that I mentioned that the flyer that's coming out is for community members, and we're hoping that you'll share it as widely as you can. And there's also a phone number and an email address on that flyer. The email address is so residents can connect and be signed up into focus groups, and that's the only place that will actually have their identifying information. Once they're signed up by the graduate student into the focus groups, we will actually, as the groups start, ask them to simply put their first name or a pseudonym into the Zoom space. And we're going to create transcripts from these, but there will be no sharing of videos audio recordings. This will be analyzed just from transcript to protect people's anonymity. There's also a phone number that people can call if they don't have a way to email in to connect. So that's part of what I wanted to make sure got said. And we really are very excited about these next steps, but let me screen share my the questions. Let me line them up so you can see them properly. Let's see which one it is. There it is. So hopefully you can see the document. Can you see it?
Yes.
Great. So there are really just 4 questions with probes associated. I'm going to hopefully not make anyone seasick, but I'll slide up to the top. We have a spoken portion where we explain what's going to happen and people agree or give verbal consent to participate. I'll slide past that for now, but we can share the whole document with you. There are really 4 main questions. The first one, we ask people what motivated them to participate. And we go around the screen, making sure that each person can talk individually. One of the nice things about this Zoom format is that people can't really talk over each other because one voice is blotted out. So we really will be careful to have an opportunity for the loud voices and the soft voices to all get time. The second, you can read them, but the second question I highlighted, bolded for you, that the focus of the second question is people's experience living in Akron when it comes to feeling safe here in action. And then we have a series of probes. The person who's moderating the focus group will only go to the probes if the participants aren't already talking about them. So these aren't specific sub-questions, they're elements we want to make sure are included. So if they're already talking about both in their own neighborhood and traveling between, we'll just let them talk. The idea is to create a conversation among people so that they can really share their experiences. The second probe is to make sure that they mention what their experience has been with police, but we don't start with that. It's just safety to begin with. And then we do check in to see if there are any positive or negative stories that they particularly wanted to tell. And all the way along, the emphasis is on storytelling, letting people share what their experiences are. The third question, what would you want policing to look like in your neighborhood? What would be ideal from your perspective? Again, would go around and let people share, and then also some opportunity to respond to each other. And then finally, sorry, let me do that. Finally, the question focused on mental health issues. So I'll read this one out loud. Police spend a good deal of time addressing domestic disturbances and problems associated with mental health. What kind of training would you like the Akron Police to have related to these issues? And then the 2 probes are, do they think that there might be alternatives that they'd like to suggest? And do they think that there might be a better response than having police come, but also would they like the police to come with? And why or why not? Hopefully, I can't see you well to ask if you have questions, so I'll stop the screen share.
Okay.
We feel like this is a really exciting opportunity, and the launch is basically as soon as you're ready to let it go. I'm here to answer questions about either the process or any concerns that people have.
Perfect. So at this time, do we have any questions? And sir, if you can help me on your end, because I'm having some technical difficulties if you see any hands raised.
I can see that Councilman Fusco has his hand raised.
Okay. Councilman Fusco?
Yes, thank you, President Somerville. And first of all, I just want to thank both Carolyn Berman and Bill Rich for everything you've done. I mean, looking forward to working with you on this project as well. But I know in the past, both of you have been just wonderful to work with in terms of the city. And I know you've worked on a lot of projects advancing our community, and thank you for all that. Certainly appreciate it. Thank you. Look forward to working even more. What's the time frame, I guess, that we're looking at? I did hear you say whenever it's ready to go, it's ready to go. But after it's ready to go, how long are we looking at here?
So this is obviously a little bit dependent on what the response rate is. So ideally, we will be scheduling and conducting focus groups by the end of the week. And we have trained students who have gone through all of the confidentiality training, ready to assist, and it's kind of a nice little team ready to work. Those students and the team are, we don't know what to expect. If we have 80 focus groups, then, and each focus group takes an hour, and then there's correcting transcripts and so on. I would imagine that we would have a good report for you guys by May. If there are 800 focus groups, that's a different game. Actually, I was going to say May, by the start of May, by the end of our term, we would have that. I think we'd like to do the data collection ideally in March to the middle of April, and then the analysis April into the beginning of May, because we can start the analysis with the very first focus group, of course. But it does depend on how many people want to participate. And I guess from our perspective, the more is better. But we are apprehensively waiting to see what the response rate will be.
Yeah, and I would encourage like a balance in terms of, the whole community as a whole, and, to try to reach out, and perhaps President Somerville, my good colleagues, if you guys have ideas and recommendations, so we can get that balance from all communities in Akron, and a good cross section of our community. And I don't know how you would balance that side of it. Yeah, I would encourage that. And if there's, maybe if you're seeing, not as much participation, say like in one area or whatever, let us know. And maybe the ward person who has all those contacts out there can assist.
So we had planned on the graduate student who will be receiving the contacts is going to ask each person to just tell for her record keeping what ward they come from. And if they don't know, she has the ward map, so she can help them sort that. So our intention was to make sure that there's as much representation across the city as possible. To that end, we've been really grateful for the assistance that Councilman Malik has given us, along with several others who assisted him in producing a list of community leaders and partners. And our second phase of this will be to convene small focus groups with people who are in a position of sort of community engagement, to have the same kind of conversation, but they just have different experiences. And we would greatly appreciate any additions that any of you would like to make to that list, so that that is a responsible representation as well.
Absolutely, duly noted. Thank you so much, though. Again, looking forward to working with both of you moving forward. Thanks for everything you do.
Thank you so much. I see Councilman Malik.
Thank you very much, President Somerville. And just kind of want to echo the conversation, especially, Councilman Fusco's point about representativeness, right? I mean, these issues of public safety and policing are, controversial issues. They have been in the past. Some of these conversations are difficult. I think we want to make sure all views across the spectrum are represented here. Whether someone is, talking about Blue Lives Matter, talking about defund the police, or somewhere in between those two, right? I think that all of those views are important to capture. I've tried to share as many kind of names of people or community groups. I would encourage all of, if anyone on council wants to send any of those to me, I can send them to Dr. Bierman. I'm sure Dr. Bierman, you can put your contact information in the chat as well. But I think also, can you just speak, Dr. Bierman? I think this is live and ready to go, right? That flyer can be shared today. I think we need to share this. Part of this is on us to share this as far and wide as we can.
That's very good. Thank you so much, Councilor Malik. And what might be helpful is that list that we worked on. If we can send that out to all of council, that way, council can just look to see if there's anyone that we might have missed. So we'll do that. Are there any other comments or questions for Dr. Bierman at this time? I don't see any more questions or comments. So again, Dr. Bierman, we want to thank you for all of your help, and we're really excited about this process. Again, thanks, Shamus. He did put in the chat the flyer. We'll also make sure that gets emailed out to all council members. So again, we really want you to share that information. Another thing that we're also encouraging, I think it was on our press release and it might be on the flyer, Councilman Malik, you can correct me if not. We are also encouraging residents to fill out the survey. As council knows, we are in search of a new police chief. And so as we are out in the community talking about reimagining public safety, we want to encourage them to go to that community survey and fill that out so that we know, what residents think our next police chief should look like and what qualities they should possess. So also want you to encourage your residents to do the same in filling out that community survey. And I think Councilman Malik has always also kind of attached that in the chat for us as well. So thank you for that. Councilman Neal.
Thanks, Madam Chair. When you said, you made me think of something that we haven't really talked about. And I know I sound like a broken record when I say this, but I'd like to know what racial equity and systemic institutional training is our police department going through right now? And I say it because of this. You don't change a system by getting rid of a police chief. We had Chief Nice, got rid of him, had Chief Ball, got rid of him. He was like the fall guy. We're fooling ourselves if you think you change a system by getting rid of one person. And we are doing the next police chief a disservice if we don't have intentional, specific training that the police force is going through. And this goes back to the resolution that I brought in. It is, let me paint a picture for you. Since we're talking about police, when there is a crime scene, be it a murder or whatever, not even our mayor, who is the chief safety officer, walks through that crime scene. Why? Because he is not properly trained. When there is a fire, I see Councilman McKittrick here. When there is a fire, you don't walk through a suspected place where there's an arson. I don't care who you are if you're not properly trained. When we talk about, I want us to grasp this. When we talk about systemic and institutional racism that has suppressed this city for years, we have an independent report that has said that, you can't have these conversations and think you're going to change things if you have not been properly trained. That goes for us as a council, a legislative body, an administrative body, and every one of our safety forces. So I think as we know that we are preparing for a new chief to come in, if we're going to do our true due diligence, we need to be talking to the mayor, Deputy Safety Director Charles Brown, and make sure that there is intense training for our department to go through, because there's something systemic. And it's not unique to Akron. If we've been following what's been going on, everyone has admitted that within policing, there is something systemic. But I want us to understand it's not just in policing. Within the legislative body and the way we do things, there's something systemic. So if we're going to really have this conversation, we have to be holistic. So when we put these things in place, be it for the auditor, as we ask our citizens to be engaged in talking about a new police chief, if we do not put things in place for the proper training for every area of our government body and our safety forces, we are doing whoever we bring in there a disservice.
Okay, Thank you so much, Councilman Neal, for adding that. And so if there is nothing else coming before this committee at this time, we will adjourn. Thank you.
That was our final committee meeting. Council will meet at 7 p.m. tonight. Thank you.